What's good, innies? Atilla is the title for this week's episode of Severance, and this one focuses in on the romantic relationships of MDR and all the complications that come with being severed at the same time. All four members of the team get a decent amount of spotlight, each interesting and compelling in their own way. There's a lot to talk about here, but before we get started, a huge shout out to the entire Tinfoil Gang, and a special shout out to the channel patrons. Thanks for choosing to support the channel directly, I appreciate you. And welcome to the newest members of the squad: Nikki Fortier, Anna Mulch, Couple Meat Productions, Juju on that beat, Randa Melhelm, Naomi Mark, Fortalus Niles, Spantoja, Spacey Jones, Jenny Westwood, Castanada Galactica, and MPT. I can't thank you enough. Look for your names in the producer credits of every video going forward. Okay gang, you know what comes next. It's time to dive. So Atilla begins with Mark and Dr. Ragabi, and if you recall the closing scene of the previous episode, Mark had his first major reintegration event. Shook by the experience, he's telling Ragabi what he saw, and he seems particularly upset by the fact that he saw Gemma, but she didn't seem to recognize him, and that's got him more worried about what might be happening to her. A key line to note in this scene is that Ragabi says that Audi Gemma still exists and can probably be saved if we believe Ragabi. Now this is good news for Mark, who is beginning to believe he has another shot. But note that when he starts getting into that negotiation part of the conversation, he hints that he might have had a drinking problem that caused friction in their relationship. The detail that lends itself to the theory that Mark might have had something to do with the accident in the first place. Now in the next scene, we're back on the severed floor with the entire MDR gang, minus Irving, of course, who recently was let go. Dylan is telling the others about Irving's picture with the directions to the testing floor elevator. The consensus is that this must be where Gemma is being kept. Yes, Dylan is sharing this with his workmates, but he's wary about taking the idea any further because of the side deal he made with Milchick. As you might expect, Helly is down for a treasure hunt, and Mark is on the fence about it. Now Mark is feeling pretty hungry, a side effect of reintegration, so he heads over to the fridge for a bite, and that's when the fun begins. Reintegration is hitting hard this time, his consciousness slipping between his severed memories like a game of hopscotch. The wildest part of it is how his mind mixes the two timelines together sometimes, to the point where you start seeing parts of one set of memories existing in the other. Now how long can he keep this up before Lumen figures it out? We'll have to wait and see. Milchick calls Miss Huang in for a meeting in the following scene, and it's mainly to let her know that he's going to be busy, so she'll need to be in charge for a while. But the scene begins with Milchick telling her that he had his performance review the day before. Now when she asks about how it went, there's a long, silent pause before he brings up the negative critique, followed by a thinly veiled threat. Milchick tells Miss Huang that her promotion is ultimately up to him, and by the look she gives him, it's clear the message was received. I do find it strange how she's supposed to be his subordinate, but she actively tries to sabotage his performance review because he won't let her have her fun. Now Milchick tells her that she needs to eradicate childish folly, which is the eloquent way of telling her to stop acting like a kid, which is weird because she is a kid. When Milchick hands the reins over to Miss Huang, she's practically jumping out of her seat, eager to sit at the big desk, but Milchick lets the air out of her tires by telling her she's got to do it from her assigned desk. Yeah, basically Milchick's like, you're too short to measure me. And I think this entire scene suggests that Miss Huang is ambitious, petty, but maybe even a little cutthroat, so you gotta keep an eye on her. Okay, so now let's check in with Mark and Helly. In this scene, we're hiding from the cameras in the restroom stall with Helly and Mark, and they're talking about the map and Milchick's ominous warning. But things quickly change when Mark blurts out that they shared vessels. No doubt one of Lumen's weirdly out of time and outdated expressions. Mark tries to ease her into things, but that's almost impossible to do in this situation. Helly eventually gets what Mark is trying to say, but it still hits her like a ton of bricks. Helly then chooses to hit the pause button because she needs time to digest all of this. What's interesting is that she assumes that her Audi did this to drive a wedge between them. Now, as much as I like to believe that Audi Helly is truly into Mark, I'm inclined to defer to inner Helly's view. After all, who knows Helly better than her innie? Helly is crushed by the news though, and it's got her feeling like her Audi has gone out of her way to exploit and manipulate every aspect of her life, down to the clothes she wears to work. But she puts the blame solely on her Audi and not on Mark. That said, the idea that Mark didn't know it was her must make her feel like she's not that different from her Audi, and I'm sure that doesn't sit well with her. Now, while this is happening, the Milchick is in the mood for some self-flagellation. He's holed up in that hidden storage area, and he does the most peculiar thing. He grabs a jar full of paper clips and 2 stacks of printed paper and begins clipping them together, the Lumen way. Judging by that stack, this took a minute. Now, why is he doing this? Well, it's related to the performance review and the anonymous criticism, but I think we're meant to understand this as Milchick trying his best to conform to the standards set by the company. This applies to the other negative remark about him using too many big words, which is honestly rich when you consider how often we see other characters use colorful, antiquated words. Now, Milchick is just being himself. He can't help it that he's got away with words, and the idea that he should change the way he speaks sounds like an attempt to put him in his place. Despite all of this, Milchick is willing to carve out entire parts of his being to appease the board. To me, this speaks to either a profound devotion to what Lumen is about, or a deep sense of obligation to Lumen for some reason that has yet to be revealed. This is more than your run-of-the-mill corporate ladder climb. In the next scene, we're dropped into the middle of the conversation between Dylan and his wife about where they went on their first date. Now, Dylan guesses that scuba diving was the activity on their first date, but which coincidentally is something his Audi actually tried recently. This is another signal to remind us that innies and outies are, at their core, essentially the same person. Throughout the scene, we get the sense that Gretchen is warming up to this innie version of her husband, and she seems to see him as a happier, less complicated version of his Audi. The conversation goes back to Outie Dylan's interests, and she tells innie Dylan that he's tried a lot of things, but nothing seems to stick. The general sense is that he seems like he's unsatisfied. Innie Dylan chalks it up to a restless imagination, but Gretchen thinks he's just not happy with his life, or maybe not happy being with her. This version of Dylan, though, he's just happy to be here, and that makes Gretchen feel really good. She's falling for this version of her husband, and at the same time realizing that while they are the same in many ways that matter, they truly are separate people. Later on, we get another scene with Gretchen and Outie Dylan at home, and they're having a typical family conversation until he asks her about the visit with his innie. The main thing to note here is that Gretchen tells him that she never saw his innie because the meeting was canceled, which is obviously not true. She's clearly feeling conflicted about her feelings for the innie version of her husband, to the point where she doesn't want him to know about it. Also, note that she's wearing purple again, a color that seems to appear during scenes or with characters where the Outie and the innie's worlds meet. We're going to get into color theory and Severance in a later video. Pay attention to when and where you see the colors red, blue, and purple prominently displayed. Okay, back over to Mark and Helly. After having some time to think about what happened at the Ortbo outing, Helly wants Mark to know that her biggest regret is that her Outie had something with Mark that she did not. Long story short, Helly wants the full Mark-esque experience, and it just so happens that the feeling is mutual. The two sneak off to that purple office and find a spot under a table for a makeshift tent. Overall, I think the scene was handled well, maintaining that innocent innie vibe all the way through. Now later on, basking in the afterglow, our two lovebirds are walking the Lumen halls. Helly asks Mark if it was different with her than with her Outie, and Mark gives the right answer. Everything is good until Mark has a nosebleed that puts a kibosh on this little party. The two meet up with Miss Huang, and she goes through a series of questions trying to figure out if there's any reason to be concerned. When she asks about hallucinations and things of that sort, Mark chooses to keep his reintegration glitches a secret. But it's only moments later that we jump into his Outie, who is back in his basement under the care of Dr. Ragabi. So Mark's been at home, but his memories from work are breaking through to the other side. Dr. Ragabi asks him if he remembers a black hallway, and then tells him that he's making progress, but she could speed things up with a procedure that comes with some risk to his life. Now Ragabi is really eager to see this one through, which makes me kind of question things. But Mark isn't okay with this idea just yet. At this point, a hangry Mark heads out to get something to eat, so we finally get to meet Burt's partner, Fields. The conversation reveals quite a bit, although much of it is subtle or hinted at. The first thing we learn is that Burt joined Lumen to make Fields happy in a roundabout way. So, according to them, Fields, a devout Christian who believes he is going to heaven, was concerned that Burt would not go to heaven because he was a bad boy. Now, getting severed would make it so that his innie could go to heaven and be with Fields. At least that's their theory. We then get a story on why they call each other Atilla, a pet name that supposedly came from calling each other Hun, and there's an obvious progression there. This, of course, also happens to be the name of the episode. The title was cleverly chosen for this reason. but also another, and I'll get into that later on in the video. Another key moment is when Fields sort of accidentally tells us that Burt has been with Lumen for at least 20 years. Now that's crazy because Lumen's severance is supposedly only 12 years old. So this could be a hint that Lumen has been severing people well before the world knew about it, and or that Burt might have been working with Lumen before severance was a thing, suggesting that he might be more Lumen than we thought. Now, remember innies, you must be disturbed by both prospects equally. Burt is giving us reasons to think that he's not telling us the whole story, and that reason is probably not a good one. The feeling only gets worse when we see Drummond casually entering Irving's house and he starts searching through Irv's sensitive paperwork. Did Burt arrange this dinner so that Drummond could search his place undisturbed? It certainly looks that way. Fields seems to be okay with Burt's innies having his own life, and that includes a relationship outside of their own. When it's time to call it a night, Burt sees Irving to the door, but he tries to reassure Irving that Fields was wrong about the 20-year thing, which right away makes me think he's lying. Not only that, Burt seems keen on meeting up with Irving with or without Fields in the future. Very interesting. Now when the scene ends, we get this sinister shot of Burt watching Irving leave. And through the magic of great visual storytelling, it becomes clear that Burt is not who we thought he was. Okay, now on to what I think is the most impactful moment of the episode. Mark is scarfing down food at a restaurant when we get a surprise visit from none other than Helena herself. She's stalking Mark now. But for what purpose? If anything has become clear this season, it's that Lumen does keep an eye on their employees' outies. Helena introduces herself to Mark, who already knows who she is, and there's this sort of natural rapport between the two. Things get kind of flirty for a bit, and it almost feels like Helena is trying to appeal to outie Mark by acting like her innie. Right after she does that, the entire vibe is off kilter, and Mark decides to leave in a panic. He's thoroughly freaked out by her, and it might be because his reintegration is giving him the faint notion that he knows her from inside of Lumen, or it might simply be that she knew so much about him and brought up the subject of Gemma so easily, like it was all planned. At the end of the day though, she's the person responsible for Gemma's apparent kidnapping, if what he believes about her is true. Still, it's very interesting that she chose to go this route. I wonder if Lumen or the board know about this. I still think her interest in Mark is genuine, even if she has an ulterior motive. She seems like she's starved for love, an idea hinted at when she says that she's never taken a man to meet her father, suggesting that she may not have had any significant romantic relationships in the past to speak of. This might be one of the many caveats that comes with being James Egan's daughter. Anyway, Mark is out, and at this point in the game, he's ready to try that procedure that is supposed to speed up the reintegration process because he's starting to feel the heat. Rugabi goes ahead with it, and it seems to work at first. Now, of course, this scene wouldn't be complete without a monkey wrench of some kind, so Devin pops in for a visit at exactly the worst time. Now, she's all geared up to continue with their plans to infiltrate and find Gemma, but Mark's not feeling so hot right now. He hasn't told her anything about his reintegration, so she's got no idea why he's acting this way. But when Mark loses feeling in his arm after experiencing a phantom smell, it becomes clear he's in trouble. It's looking like a stroke, innies. Mark collapses to the ground, foaming at the mouth, while Devin and Rugabi try to help. She did say that this procedure was risky, possibly life-threatening. Now, this scene might be the inspiration behind the name Atilla. The real-life historical figure, Atilla the Hun, died from a nosebleed caused by a brain hemorrhage and choked on his own blood. Very interesting. Well, that's it for this episode. I hope you enjoyed this recap and light theory video. Let me know your thoughts on this episode. I look forward to seeing that. In the meantime, be safe out there. And until next time, off you go.